Your house isn't an asset. Your car isn't an asset. That education you're paying for might not be an asset either. Robert Kiyosaki's rich dad taught him this brutal truth while his poor dad, a PhD, struggled financially his entire life. Two fathers, same child, opposite money philosophies. One builds wealth, one builds debt. The difference isn't income level or education or even intelligence. It's how they define one simple word that most people get completely backwards. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. 4 big ideas from this book. 1. Coffee. Let's pour. First, why assets and liabilities get confused in most people's minds. Second, how the cash flow quadrant determines your financial future. Third, why traditional education creates employees, not entrepreneurs. Fourth, the power of making money work for you instead of working for money. These aren't just concepts, they're different ways of seeing. Robert Kiyosaki was 9 years old when his friend Mike's father sat both boys down at the kitchen table and drew 2 simple diagrams on a piece of paper. The first diagram showed a box labeled income with an arrow pointing down to another box labeled expenses. Money flowed in, money flowed out, and that was it. The second diagram had 3 boxes: income at the top, expenses in the middle, and a new box at the bottom labeled assets. But this time, there was an additional arrow showing money flowing from the assets box back up to income. Mike's father, who would become Kiyosaki's rich dad, tapped his pencil on that crucial arrow. "This," he said, "is the difference between the rich and everyone else. The rich buy assets. The poor and middle class buy liabilities but think they're assets." He drew one more diagram showing a house with a mortgage payment of $1,200 flowing out each month, then looked at the boys. Your house is not an asset if money flows from your pocket to pay for it every month. It's a liability. This moment crystallized what would become the foundational principle of Kiyosaki's entire philosophy about money. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. It sounds almost insultingly simple, doesn't it? Yet this distinction cuts through decades of financial complexity and conventional wisdom like a knife through butter. The power of this framework isn't in its sophistication but in its clarity. Most people spend their lives acquiring what they believe are assets, never realizing they're actually accumulating liabilities. They buy bigger houses with bigger mortgages, newer cars with higher payments, and more stuff that requires insurance, maintenance, and storage. Each purchase feels like progress, like building wealth, but the monthly cash flow tells a different story. Money keeps flowing out of their pockets, month after month, year after year. Rich Dad's insight was that wealthy people think differently about every financial decision. Before they buy anything, they ask one question: will this put money in my pocket or take money out? A rental property that generates positive cash flow after all expenses, that's an asset. A primary residence with a mortgage, property taxes, and maintenance costs, that's a liability, regardless of what it might be worth on paper or how much you love living there. This thinking extends far beyond real estate. Consider your car. If you're driving it to work to earn money, it might feel like an asset, but look at the cash flow. Insurance, gas, maintenance, depreciation, loan payments if you financed it. Money flows out of your pocket every month. Now consider someone who buys a car specifically to rent it out through a car-sharing service, generating enough monthly income to cover all those expenses plus profit. Same object, completely different financial reality. The stock market offers another clear example. When you buy shares of a dividend-paying stock, you're purchasing an asset if those dividends exceed any fees or taxes you pay. The stock puts money in your pocket regularly. But if you're buying growth stocks that pay no dividends, hoping to sell them later at a higher price, you're essentially speculating. No money flows into your pocket until you sell, and you might wait years or decades for that to happen. Even education fits this framework. Learning a skill that increases your earning power or allows you to generate additional income streams, that's investing in an asset. Accumulating student loans for a degree that doesn't meaningfully increase your income potential. You've just purchased an expensive liability that will drain money from your pocket for years to come. The uncomfortable truth is that most people's financial struggles stem from this fundamental confusion. They work harder to afford more liabilities, thinking they're building wealth, but they're actually digging themselves deeper into a hole. They celebrate paying off their house, not realizing they've just reduced their expenses rather than increased their assets. They feel wealthy because they own things, not because those things generate income. Rich Dad's diagram reveals why the wealthy seem to get richer effortlessly while everyone else struggles. The wealthy focus relentlessly on acquiring assets that generate passive income. Each asset they buy creates money that can be used to buy more assets, creating a compounding effect. Meanwhile, most people use their income to service liabilities, leaving little or nothing to invest in actual wealth-building assets. Ask yourself, when you look at everything you own, how much money is actually flowing into your pocket each month versus flowing out? Robert Kiyosaki tells a story about sitting in a restaurant with his rich dad when he was 25, watching the lunch crowd rush in and out. His rich dad drew 4 letters on a napkin: ESBI, employee, self-employed, business owner, investor. Then he pointed to different tables around them. The waitress hurrying between orders, making maybe $12 an hour plus tips, that's the E quadrant. The lawyer at the corner table, billing $300 an hour but only getting paid when he works S quadrant. The woman quietly reviewing franchise reports while barely touching her salad, owning 17 McDonald's locations, B quadrant. And the older gentleman reading the Wall Street Journal, living off dividends from his stock portfolio, I quadrant. Rich Dad explained that most people spend their entire lives moving left to right across the bottom, from employee to self-employed, thinking they're making progress. The waitress dreams of opening her own restaurant. The accountant quits his firm to start his own practice. They're still trading time for money, just with different bosses. The real wealth, he said, comes from moving up, from owning systems that work without you, or owning assets that generate income while you sleep. The principle here cuts against everything we're taught about career advancement. We're conditioned to believe that moving from employee to self-employed represents freedom, represents success. But Kiyosaki's rich dad saw it differently. He understood that location in this quadrant determines not just your income, but your relationship with time itself. Employees and self-employed people are trapped in what he called the time for money trap. Even if the self-employed person makes more per hour, they're still constrained by hours in the day. Business owners and investors have broken free from that constraint. They've learned to make money work for them instead of working for money. This isn't just about the obvious differences in earning potential. It's about thinking patterns, risk tolerance, and what you optimize for. People on the left side of the quadrant typically optimize for security and steady paychecks. People on the right side optimize for freedom and passive income, even if it means more uncertainty up front. The employee wants to know exactly when their next paycheck arrives. The investor wants to know how to make their money multiply without their direct involvement. Think about your own situation right now. Maybe you're climbing the corporate ladder, getting promoted, earning more each year. That's still the E quadrant even if you're making 6 figures. Or maybe you've taken the entrepreneurial leap, started consulting, opened a small business. You feel liberated from office politics and rigid schedules, but you're probably working more hours than ever. That's the S quadrant trap. You didn't buy yourself a business, you bought yourself a job. The B quadrant requires a fundamental shift in thinking. Instead of asking, how can I do this work better? You start asking, how can I build a system so this work gets done without me? Instead of being the best graphic designer, you build a design agency. Instead of being the most skilled consultant, you create courses and frameworks that scale your knowledge. The goal isn't to work in your business, but to work on your business until it runs without you. The I quadrant takes this even further. Here you're not building businesses from scratch. You're buying pieces of existing businesses through stocks, real estate, or other investments. You're putting your money to work in systems other people built and manage. The wealthy understand that true financial freedom comes from owning assets that appreciate and generate cash flow, not from earning higher wages or fees. Most people never make this mental shift because it requires giving up the illusion of control. When you're an employee or self-employed, you feel like your income depends directly on your effort. Work harder, make more money. It's simple and predictable, but it's also limiting. The business owner and investor quadrants require you to trust systems, other people, and market forces. It feels riskier because the connection between your daily actions and your income becomes less direct. But here's what Kiyosaki's rich dad understood. The left side of the quadrant feels safer, but it's actually riskier long-term. Your income disappears the moment you stop working. The right side feels riskier, but it's actually more secure because your income doesn't depend on your personal time and energy. Ask yourself, which quadrant are you operating in right now, and what would it take to start building systems or assets that could eventually work without you? Robert Kiyosaki's two fathers couldn't have been more different when it came to money advice. His biological father, the poor dad, held a PhD and earned a respectable government salary. But he'd always tell young Robert to study hard, get good grades, find a secure job with benefits, and work your way up the corporate ladder. The rich dad, his best friend's father who never finished 8th grade, would pull Robert aside and say something completely different. Study hard, yes, but study to understand investments, learn how money works, and figure out how to buy assets that put money in your pocket while you sleep. Both men were intelligent, both worked hard, but only one understood that traditional education teaches you to work for money, while financial education teaches you to make money work for you. This wasn't just philosophical difference. The numbers told the story. Poor dad spent his life climbing the salary ladder, eventually earning 6 figures, but he also accumulated bigger mortgages, car payments, and credit card debt with each promotion. Rich dad, meanwhile, started buying small rental properties in his 20s, reinvested the cash flow into more properties, then moved into small businesses. By the time both men reached their 50s, poor dad was still living paycheck to paycheck despite his impressive salary, while rich dad had built enough passive income to never worry about money again. The gap between them wasn't intelligence or work ethic. It was financial education. Poor dad knew how to earn money through his expertise and labor. Rich dad knew how to acquire assets that generated money whether he showed up or not. One had job security, the other had financial security. One traded time for money, the other had money working around the clock. This reveals something unsettling about our entire educational system. We spend 12 years learning algebra and history and literature, which is valuable, but we graduate without understanding the difference between an asset and a liability. We can recite the periodic table, but we don't know what compound interest actually means for our bank account. We memorize dates of historical battles, but we've never seen a balance sheet. The system produces employees, not investors. It creates people who are really good at making other people rich. Think about your own financial education. Where did you learn about money? Probably from your parents, who learned from their parents, passing down the same myths and fears and misconceptions through generations. Maybe you picked up fragments from friends or coworkers, or tried to decode financial advice from magazines that assume you already understand the basics. Most of us are flying blind, making huge financial decisions based on conventional wisdom that often isn't particularly wise. This plays out in concrete ways every single day. You get a raise and immediately start thinking about a bigger apartment or a newer car, because that's what people do with more money. You contribute to your 401k because everyone says you should, but you don't actually understand what those mutual funds are investing in or why. You keep most of your money in a savings account, earning virtually nothing because it feels safe, even though inflation is quietly eroding your purchasing power every year. Meanwhile, people with financial education are doing something completely different with that same paycheck. They're calculating how much rental property they could buy with a small down payment. They're researching dividend-paying stocks that could generate monthly income. They're looking at their expenses and asking which ones could be turned into tax-deductible business expenses. They're not just earning money, they're deploying money strategically. The gap isn't just about knowledge, it's about language. Financial education gives you a vocabulary for thinking about money differently. Instead of seeing a monthly payment, you see the total interest paid over the life of a loan. Instead of seeing a purchase, you see an opportunity cost. Instead of seeing income, you see cash flow potential. This isn't about becoming obsessed with money, it's about becoming fluent in the language that money speaks. The most successful people aren't necessarily the highest earners. They're the ones who understand how money moves, how assets appreciate, how debt can be leveraged responsibly, how tax laws favor investors over employees. They know that financial security doesn't come from a bigger salary. It comes from building systems that generate income independently of their direct labor. This is why the rich keep getting richer while everyone else stays on the hamster wheel. It's not a conspiracy, it's a knowledge gap. The wealthy understand principles that simply aren't taught in school or discussed at most dinner tables. They know how to read financial statements, how to evaluate investment opportunities, how to structure their finances to minimize taxes and maximize growth. Ask yourself, what would change in your financial life if you spent the next year learning about money with the same intensity you once spent learning to drive? Robert Kiyosaki was 18 when his rich dad walked him through the numbers on a small rental property. The asking price was $12,000, which seemed impossible until rich dad showed him how the math actually worked. With a down payment of just $1,200 and owner financing for the rest, the monthly rental income would be $125, while the mortgage payment was only $95. That $30 monthly cash flow might not sound like much, but Rich Dad explained this was money working for him, not him working for money. Meanwhile, Kiyosaki's poor dad, despite his advanced education and steady job, was still making payments on student loans he'd taken out years earlier, essentially working to pay for an education that had already happened. The contrast was stark. Poor dad had invested in his education, which was valuable, but that investment required him to work harder to pay it off. Rich dad had invested in an asset that paid him every month, whether he showed up or not. The rental property was working 24 hours a day, generating income while he slept, while he was at his regular job, while he was on vacation. Poor dad's approach meant trading time for money in a direct exchange. Rich Dad's approach meant setting up systems where money could multiply independently of his personal time and effort. This reveals the fundamental difference between working for money and having money work for you. When you work for money, you're essentially renting out your time and skills in exchange for a paycheck. The moment you stop working, the money stops coming. But when money works for you, it's busy generating returns through investments, businesses, or assets that produce cash flow. The wealthy understand this distinction and spend their time acquiring and building these money-generating systems rather than just trading hours for dollars. The principle extends far beyond real estate. Every time you put money into a savings account earning interest, that's money working for you, albeit at a modest pace. When you invest in dividend-paying stocks, those companies are essentially paying you for the privilege of using your capital to grow their business. When you start a business that can operate without your constant presence, you've created a system where money and processes work on your behalf. The key insight is that your personal time and energy are finite resources, but money, properly deployed, can work around the clock. In today's world, this principle has become more accessible than ever, though it requires a fundamental shift in thinking. Instead of immediately spending that tax refund or bonus on consumption, consider how that money could start working for you. $1,000 invested in a broad market index fund, assuming historical returns, could grow to over $10,000 in 30 years without you adding another penny. That same $1,000 spent on a vacation creates memories, but no ongoing financial benefit. The digital age has democratized many of these opportunities. You can start investing with minimal amounts through apps and platforms that didn't exist when Kiyosaki wrote his book. You can create online businesses, invest in real estate through crowdfunding platforms, or even lend money to others through peer-to-peer lending services. The barrier to entry has dropped dramatically, but the mental barrier often remains the same. Most people still think in terms of earning more money through additional work, rather than making their existing money more productive. The shift requires patience and delayed gratification. When Rich Dad's rental property was generating $30 a month, it would have taken years to recoup even the down payment, let alone see substantial returns. But compound growth and time were on his side. As property values increased and rents rose with inflation, that modest investment became increasingly valuable. More importantly, the cash flow provided capital for additional investments, creating a snowball effect where money working for you generates more money to put to work. The wealthy don't necessarily earn dramatically more than middle-class professionals. What they do differently is deploy their money strategically, so it multiplies independently of their direct labor. They buy assets that appreciate and generate cash flow rather than liabilities that depreciate and create ongoing expenses. They think in terms of building wealth-generating systems rather than just increasing their earned income. This mindset shift changes how you evaluate every financial decision. Instead of asking whether you can afford something, you start asking what that money could earn if invested instead. Instead of celebrating pay raises as the primary path to financial security, you focus on building multiple streams of passive income that can eventually replace your salary entirely. Ask yourself, what percentage of your monthly income comes from money working for you rather than you working for money? Kiyosaki draws this line in the sand. Assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out. Your house. If you're making payments on it, it's a liability until it generates income. The cash flow quadrant splits how people make money into 4 boxes: employee, self-employed, business owner, and investor. Most of us live on the left side, trading time for money. The wealthy migrate right, where money works without them. There's this education gap that schools never filled. We learned algebra, but not how money actually flows, how debt works, or what makes the wealthy tick. The final piece is flipping the script entirely. Instead of working for money your whole life, you build systems where money works for you. It's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep and how hard that money works while you sleep. Track every dollar that comes in and goes out for the next 7 days. Write it down. Don't change your spending, just observe. At the end, categorize each expense. Does this put money back in my pocket eventually, or does it just take money out? This isn't about judgment, it's about seeing the flow clearly for the first time. That's one book, one coffee. Next coffee, The Richest Man in Babylon.